Okay, so on the refined paint layer, smaller brush, lower opacity. I get to kind of transition between some of these color choices. Stealing color from myself. But you see a low opacity helps blend them together. But still a brush big enough so if I push hard, I can cover more ground. And really carve in some of these wrinkles, soften them out. There's a highlight on one side of them, right, which gives them their depth. And I can use the navigator to zoom in anywhere I want. So if I want to bring blue in on top of this eyelid or this brow ridge, I can put it in and then I can paint over it. You see I'll kind of blend the colors together. I keep my brush work going with the direction of the skin. And this is why you need a lot of history steps, at least 300, at least 200 to 300, because each stroke you make doesn't make a whole lot of difference in digital painting. But what if you find that you're on the wrong layer? And that's why it's good to lock a lot of these, so you can't make that mistake. Because then you'd have to go back many, many steps. And it's not so much the brush you use, it's getting used to it and using it to the effect you want, understanding it enough to control it. That's what's important. And there's kind of two ways you can feel, or two ways I usually feel at this point in a digital painting. I either feel like I want it to be done, or I feel like it's never going to get there. And you just do it until it starts to come together. And it does. And once it starts to come together, it all goes very quickly from there. And you're just looking for consistency across the painting. But it does take quite a bit of time. Digital coloring is a whole lot easier because you just have open expanses between your line work to fill in. This is really getting the most out of every stroke you put down. Even when you're not going for photorealism, it takes a lot of effort and attention to really consider what's best for each area. So I haven't, even though I'm zoomed in, I'm still using the same brush size, though it is smaller than I used in previous layers. I don't want to get too nitpicky, and I don't want to treat it like it's a drawing or an etching. But I want to have more control over each individual stroke, which is why I would zoom in, because now the edges on both sides of the stroke really matter more. And I've pretty much established my palette of colors, so I shouldn't need to steal from anything else now. But I can still have kind of stylistic references. Now this might be where I want to have extra reference to really help me see how these wrinkles and things work in more than just one photo. How strong they are. When I was doing political cartoons for newspapers, I'd always try to use the standard publicity photos of politicians and public figures that I was doing caricatures of. But I also try to find ones where they have a lot more movement in their face. So I can kind of see which of their wrinkles and which of their their creases are authentic to them. Especially if you're making a cartoon, not all of them are equal. So he actually has very faint ones across the top of his forehead here. They're important because when he smiles big, they come out, kind of break up the highlight of his forehead. So I can look for that then in the reference and see it. And I can see that all that's coming through in my navigator. And I know I'm kind of onto something with digital painting when I start missing actual painting. This is the exact kind of approach I would use if I was using oil or acrylic, kind of blending those colors together to get the wrinkles in the forehead. So big difference with that refined paint layer. Just getting closer and closer. So have faith, it will come together. Even if you're using crazy colors like I. It's only in the refined paint layer that I start using a lot of variety of color, all in the same area. You know, like turning one side of the wrinkles in the forehead with a cool color, and going back with a warm on the other side. Making sure the value doesn't get too diluted. And that's why a tablet's absolutely essential, so that you have more variety in your stroke. Digital painting is not mechanical because it's not mechanical. You don't want it to look mechanical just because of the tools you're using. Nothing about this is any different than what you do with a regular brush. It's just you don't have to pay for the paint. Okay, so this eye, there's a lot of kind of value adjustment I need. Need a certain shadow on this upper eyelid at the corners. The blue. Need a really deep shadow here. See that? Do that with a layering of red and blue. And I need to brighten up the brow. You try to find kind of brushwork that fits with the skin, direction of the skin. Cross-hatching and stuff isn't as effective on faces as it is in other parts of the body because the face moves in so many really defined areas. You want to move your brush with the surface. Even if you're going for a photorealistic finish and all the brush strokes will eventually disappear, you'll have an easier time smoothing them if you kind of move them all with the shape of the skin. Because I'm only at 70% opacity, in order to really get a color or a value to stick, it means I have to go over it a few times. And each time I go over it, I'm reshaping it, making it a little bit more organic looking, a little bit more intentional, bringing a little bit of variety and extra color into it. That's good. So that it pays off up close as well as far away. We're not going for perfection with our painting, we're going with engagement. Good thing I had those layers locked. I can bring those color choices right up to the hairline. Now, some people like to use the smudge tool at this point. That helps blend and soften, and kind of merge things together. I tend to just like a soft edge brush and just play with the low opacities and keep selecting the colors that mix between them. Just because the smudge tool takes a while to process and doesn't seem as controllable as some of these other methods. By all means, you're going to find your own way. Remember that some textures, like hair, especially at the hairline, are not crisp, simple textures. So you're going to have some of the skin color in the hair on the hairline. You can have some of the hair kind of broken up. And with digital, that's pretty easy to do. Bring those colors in. See a big difference. It's most fun to work on the eyes. So I'm trying to work around the eyes without taking the bait and going in for the really dramatic stuff yet. But you want to make sure the eyes are situated right. And if they're not, you can move them. You can stretch and warp, underpainting layers underneath, like I did the warp tool to make it match the sketch proportions early on, setting this up. You always want to be kind of checking that, but the whole head's coming together okay. So my challenge is I want to keep that kind of yellowishness to the highlight side and bring more kind of the blues in on the shadow side. And then that gives me reds and oranges just to play with as midtones in both. You also want to look at kind of the spaces between features, like how much space is there between his eye and his sideburn there. That helps you know the size of shadows around his eyes. The shape of the hair. Where to start the reflected light. Not many people have chiseled jaw lines either. So that becomes quite soft and blended. You have kind of multiple jaw lines here. Follow those through.